Alexis Reynolds sat alone in her office, the hum of her sleek computer filling the quiet room as she reviewed the week's customer feedback reports. Polished mahogany walls surrounded her, and on her desk, a scattering of framed family photos stood as reminders of her journey. Her eyes skimmed over the words on each page: excellent service, beautiful ambience, attention to detail, each one a box ticked, a job well done. Yet Alexis couldn't shake a feeling that something was missing, that beneath these glowing reports, the true culture of her restaurants was beginning to slip. She leaned back, her fingers drumming lightly against the desk as she recalled her beginnings. She had built this business from the ground up, starting with a small bistro in a corner of her neighborhood. She had put everything she had into making it a place where people of all backgrounds could feel welcome and respected. She remembered her mother's words clearly, spoken on countless nights when they had huddled together in their small, rented apartment. No matter how far you go, Alexis, respect will be the only thing that carries you through. It was these words, woven with her own hard work, that had transformed her little bistro into an empire, a restaurant chain known for its elegance and warmth. But recently, Alexis had sensed a change. As the business grew, her employees seemed to lose sight of the values she had instilled in them. Reports from managers and regional directors painted a perfect picture. But Alexis could feel the reality slipping through the cracks. She began to notice subtleties: customers who felt overlooked, staff members who spoke of a shift in the environment, colder, more transactional vibe replacing the warmth she had once fought so hard to create. Her gaze landed on one particular report that stood out like a thorn among roses. The staff only pays attention to certain guests. Those words, small and seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of things, echoed in her mind. They hinted at a problem far deeper than a simple lapse in customer service. It was an issue of culture, something Alexis knew could rot a business from the inside out if left unchecked. As she closed the report with a snap, her mind whirred with questions. How had it come to this? She had always hired the best managers, people who shared her vision. Yet, somehow, those values had become diluted along the way. She wondered if they had been too focused on catering to their wealthier clientele, forgetting that her success was built on the belief that everyone who walked through those doors deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. Leaning back in her chair, Alexis glanced at the framed photo on her desk. In it, a younger version of herself stood in front of her very first restaurant. Arms crossed, a broad, determined smile on her face. It had been a humble place: small tables, mismatched chairs, a barely there kitchen staff. But what it lacked in glamour, it made up for in heart. It had been a place where people felt at home, where they could bring their families, friends, and stories, knowing they would be valued and respected. The memory ignited something within her, a desire to restore what had been lost, to reignite the spirit that had carried her this far. She realized that there was only one way to uncover the truth. She would have to see it for herself, but not as Alexis Reynolds, the CEO and founder of one of the most respected restaurant chains in the city. No, she would have to go in as an ordinary trainee, blending into the background, invisible to the staff and customers alike. She would be just another face on the floor, seeing the reality unfiltered, without the polish reserved for VIPs. She rose from her chair and walked over to the wardrobe in the corner of her office, her mind already racing with plans. Gone would be the sharp business suits, the high heels, and the jewelry that subtly whispered her success. Instead, she would wear something simple, something plain that would make her blend in. Her designer handbag would stay behind, replaced by a modest tote, and her luxury smartphone would be swapped out for a basic model. As she changed into a pair of worn jeans and a simple blouse, she caught her reflection in the mirror, stripped of her usual elegance. She looked different, almost unrecognizable. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of vulnerability. She was stepping out of her world of authority and influence, into an unknown space where her word might not hold weight. But then, She thought of the values she had built her life upon, the respect she had worked so hard to cultivate, and the vulnerability was replaced with resolve. This was about more than her business. It was about ensuring that the legacy she had built would continue to uphold the values she cherished. And if she found that her staff had indeed lost their way, she would be ready to guide them back, step by step, until the heart of her business beat once more with the respect and dignity it was founded upon. With one last look in the mirror, Alexis picked up her tote bag and walked toward the door. She wasn't just walking into her restaurant that night. She was walking into the heart of a problem that needed to be fixed, one that only she could resolve. As she closed the door behind her, she knew that her journey to reclaim the spirit of her restaurant had just begun. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss out on our next one. Alexis slipped quietly through the restaurant's main entrance, now dressed in a pair of faded jeans, plain blouse, and a simple tote slung over her shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt unremarkable, blending effortlessly into the sleek, polished space that she had built from the ground up. Gone were her tailored suits, her understated jewelry, and the confidence that radiated from her presence as CEO. Instead, she was just another face, an unfamiliar trainee among her own staff. The restaurant was a sight to behold. Glittering chandeliers cast a soft glow across the marble floors, illuminating tables draped in fine linens and set with silverware that gleamed in the low light. A subtle scent of truffle oil and fresh herbs wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the notes of soft jazz that filled the air. Every detail spoke of the luxury and sophistication Alexis had worked so hard to cultivate. Yet, tonight, her mission was not to bask in the success but to uncover the flaws hidden beneath this veneer of perfection. As she walked toward the reception area, Alexis caught sight of the maitre d', a tall, slender man named Gerard. Known for his charm and flawless service, she had hired him herself, impressed by his ability to handle the most demanding guests with ease. But now, she observed him through new eyes, hoping to see how he truly conducted himself when he believed he was dealing with just another trainee. Gerard's gaze landed on her as she approached, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of surprise, almost skepticism. As his eyes scanned her modest attire, his practiced smile returned, though noticeably thinner than usual. "You're the new trainee, I presume?" he asked in a neutral tone, as though she were just another item on his checklist. His eyes held no warmth, no hint of the welcoming demeanor he reserved for high-paying guests. "Yes, that's me," Alexis replied softly, deliberately adopting a humble posture. She didn't want to stand out, didn't want to reveal any hint of authority. She was here to observe, to see the reality her staff and guests experienced without her influence clouding their behavior. "Right?" Gerard muttered, glancing down at his schedule. "Managers waiting for you in the back. Just follow the hallway to the left." Without a second glance, he turned his attention to a pair of wealthy patrons who had just entered, his smile brightening instantly. The brush-off stung, but Alexis reminded herself that this was exactly what she was here to see. She took a quiet breath and headed down the hallway, her steps lighter than usual, as if she were treading a fine line between two worlds, her world as the owner and this new world as an unnoticed trainee. In the staff room, she found Daniel, the restaurant's young, ambitious shift manager, who greeted her with a brisk nod. Dressed in a sharp, fitted suit, Daniel looked every bit the polished leader of a high-end establishment. He was known for his efficiency and his ability to keep operations running smoothly. Yet Alexis couldn't shake a nagging feeling that there was more beneath his surface than she had seen before. "All right, let's get this over with," Daniel said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "We run a tight ship here, so pay attention, do as you're told, and we'll get along fine." He handed her an apron and pointed to a row of hooks on the wall. "Put that on, and I'll give you the rundown." Alexis took the apron, feeling a twinge of something unfamiliar, a mixture of humility and curiosity. She had spent years running this business, but in this moment, She felt like a stranger in her own creation. Daniel began his rapid-fire introduction, covering everything from table settings to the order of service. His tone clipped and efficient. "This isn't the kind of place where we have time to babysit," he added with a smirk. "So, try not to mess up." Suppressing a smile, Alexis nodded. "I'll do my best," she replied, maintaining the deferential tone of a trainee. His dismissive attitude didn't surprise her, but it was revealing. It showed her how far the staff's attitude had drifted from the values she had envisioned. As her first shift began, Alexis noticed how her colleagues, experienced waiters and waitresses, barely acknowledged her presence. They moved with practiced ease, exchanging quick glances and muttered comments, clearly unimpressed by the new girl. Every task she was assigned felt deliberately tedious: clearing tables, fetching water, carrying trays. It was menial work, designed to remind her of her position at the bottom of the hierarchy. Still, Alexis took on each task without complaint, absorbing every slight and every dismissive glance. She could feel the weight of her coworkers' indifference, their subtle sense of superiority. It was unsettling, a stark contrast to the inclusive, respectful environment she had once envisioned. As the evening wore on, the restaurant filled with guests, most of whom were dressed in designer suits and evening gowns. Their conversations a steady hum of low voices and polite laughter. Alexis found herself stationed near a corner table, where she had a clear view of the dining area. She watched as the experienced servers moved seamlessly, their smiles practiced and their service tailored to each guest's status. Patrons who appeared wealthy were treated with a deferential warmth, their smallest whims attended to without hesitation. Meanwhile, guests who didn't exude the same level of affluence received noticeably less attention, delayed service, curt nods, and the occasional hint of impatience. The disparity was subtle, but unmistakable. For Alexis, each small, seemingly insignificant act chipped away at the illusion of excellence she had once believed in. Near the end of her shift, Alexis felt the fatigue settling in. The tasks were repetitive, the trays heavy, and her patience strained. She moved to the back to drop off a tray when she overheard a quiet conversation between two waitstaff. "So, what do you think of the new girl?" one of them asked, casting a glance in her direction. The other shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She'll either quit or mess up soon enough. They always do." Alexis felt a flicker of frustration but kept her composure. It was clear they viewed her as expendable, a disposable cog in the machine. The realization was disheartening, yet it strengthened her resolve. This was why she had come, to witness the reality her staff faced, to understand the environment they had created in her absence. As the shift wound down, Daniel approached her once more. "Not bad for your first day," he said, though the compliment felt hollow. "Just try not to trip over your own feet tomorrow." His smirk returned, and Alexis forced herself to smile politely, knowing that she would need to maintain her cover a little longer. After changing out of her apron, Alexis left through the back door, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth of the restaurant. She took a deep breath, letting the day's experiences sink in. She had come looking for answers, and what she had found was both disturbing and revealing. As she walked away from the restaurant, Alexis felt a surge of determination. The problem ran deeper than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about customer service or maintaining appearances. It was about the culture that had developed in her absence, a culture that had eroded the very heart of her business. Tomorrow, she would return, not as the owner but as an invisible trainee, determined to uncover every flaw, every hidden fault. The journey she had started tonight was far from over. She knew now that reclaiming the spirit of her business would take more than observation. It would require action, courage, and a commitment to restoring the values that had brought her this far. Alexis arrived at the restaurant just as the evening rush began, slipping in quietly through the side entrance that staff typically used. The usual grandeur of the dining room felt different as she stepped inside, no longer as an owner but as a humble trainee. The chandeliers cast a golden glow over the marble floors. Soft music played in the background, and the hum of lively conversation filled the air. Every detail was meticulously planned, creating an ambience that oozed sophistication and exclusivity. She had always loved this feeling, the sense of entering a world removed from the everyday grind, but tonight, she was here with a different purpose. As Alexis moved toward the service station, she could feel the curious gazes of the other staff. They sized her up in quick, assessing glances, whispering amongst themselves as if she were an intruder. No one knew she was their employer. She was just another new hire, likely to be here for a week or two before moving on. She watched as servers glided smoothly between tables, offering practiced smiles and polite nods. But there was a certain detachment in their movements, as though each interaction was rehearsed and mechanical. The restaurant manager, Daniel, assigned Alexis to shadow one of the senior waiters, a young woman named Sophie. Sophie was tall, graceful, and moved with a quiet confidence that came from years of experience in high-end service. She welcomed Alexis with a polite but distant smile, giving her a quick rundown of the service expectations. Just stay close, watch what I do, and try not to get in anyone's way, Sophie instructed, barely glancing at Alexis. She seemed accustomed to the rhythm of the restaurant, seamlessly balancing trays of champagne and plates of hors d'oeuvres with a poised efficiency. As Alexis followed Sophie, she observed the subtle hierarchy that existed among the staff. Servers, busboys, and hostesses all moved with a sense of purpose. But there was an unspoken rule that some guests deserved extra care and attention. High-paying clientele, business magnates, well-dressed couples, and those who carried themselves with an air of wealth received smiles, immediate service, and a hint of deference. Other patrons, those who didn't exude the same level of affluence, were handled politely, but without the same warmth or enthusiasm. A few tables in particular caught Alexis's attention. At one, a middle-aged couple in modest attire waited patiently for their order, their smiles polite yet hesitant. She noticed the servers passing by their table multiple times, prioritizing nearby diners who seemed more affluent. Across the room, a family with 2 young children sat in a quieter corner, their table slightly removed from the center of the dining area. Their service was efficient but lacked the personal touch given to other guests. Alexis's heart sank a little as she witnessed the subtle, almost imperceptible inequality in the way guests were treated. This wasn't the restaurant she had envisioned. The disparities in service were small but undeniable, and they went against everything she believed in. For her, every customer, regardless of their appearance or status, should feel welcomed, valued, and respected. Yet here she was, watching as her staff catered preferentially to those they deemed worthy of the restaurant's finest hospitality. As Alexis continued to shadow Sophie, a commotion by the entrance caught her attention. A group of well-dressed men entered, their laughter loud and their presence commanding. They exuded wealth and confidence, glancing around the room as though they owned it. Sophie straightened instantly, her expression brightening as she adjusted her posture and prepared to greet them. "Ah, there they are, the regulars," Sophie muttered under her breath, a hint of resignation in her voice. She turned to Alexis, her tone suddenly sharper. "When you see guests like that, remember, they're the kind who expect top service. No matter what, they're generous, but only if you play by their rules." "Got it." Alexis nodded, feeling an uncomfortable pang in her chest. She followed Sophie as they moved toward the table, carrying menus and glasses of champagne. Sophie's demeanor shifted immediately as she addressed the men, her voice taking on a warmth and charm that hadn't been present before. "Good evening, gentlemen," she greeted, flashing a practiced smile. "Welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you with us." The men barely acknowledged Sophie's greeting, too absorbed in their own conversation. They laughed loudly, speaking over her as they discussed their evening plans and the business deals they had closed that day. Sophie remained patient, her expression unchanging, waiting for an opportunity to take their orders. One of the men, dressed in a tailored suit with a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, finally looked up and snapped his fingers. "We'll start with a round of your finest whiskey," he said dismissively, not even glancing at Sophie. "And make sure our food is quick. We're in a hurry tonight." Sophie nodded, bowing slightly before turning back toward the kitchen. Alexis saw the strain in Sophie's expression, the forced smile and the glint of irritation in her eyes as she moved with quick, measured steps. Alexis followed her to the service station, where Sophie finally allowed her composure to slip, sighing quietly as she prepared the men's drink order. "Is it always like this with them?" Alexis asked softly, trying to strike a balance between curiosity and empathy. Sophie glanced at her, a weary look crossing her face. "Pretty much. They're regulars, and they spend a fortune, so we're expected to bend over backward for them. Doesn't matter if they're rude or demanding, they pay well. So we do what we have to." A faint bitterness colored Sophie's words, and Alexis felt a surge of sympathy for her. Here was an employee who worked hard, who delivered excellent service, yet seemed trapped in a system that valued money over respect. It was clear that Sophie had grown accustomed to tolerating such behavior, viewing it as an inevitable part of the job. For Alexis, this was more than just a breach of decorum, it was a sign of a larger, systemic issue within her business. As the evening wore on, Alexis continued to observe the disparity in service, each interaction confirming her fears. Guests who exuded wealth were granted a level of warmth and attentiveness that others simply did not receive. The staff had been conditioned to prioritize the affluent, subtly dismissing those who didn't fit the restaurant's image. The night came to an end with a quiet sense of unease. Alexis had seen enough to understand that the problem ran deep. Her restaurant had become a place where appearances mattered more than people, where profit dictated kindness and where employees had learned to ignore their own sense of dignity in favor of appeasing difficult clients. As she left the restaurant that night, Alexis's heart felt heavy. She had built her business on values of respect and inclusivity. Yet somewhere along the way, those ideals had become buried under layers of profit margins and polished luxury. The realization was sobering, but it also fueled a determination within her. If this was the reality her staff faced every day, then it was her responsibility to change it. She wouldn't let her restaurant become a place where people felt invisible or undervalued. Alexis resolved that tomorrow, she would return not as a bystander, but as someone prepared to ask hard questions and confront the uncomfortable truths that had come to define her business. This was only the beginning, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to restore the heart of her restaurant. The second night of Alexis's undercover stint started smoothly. Dressed in the same plain jeans and blouse, she arrived early, blending into the steady stream of restaurant staff as they prepared for the evening rush. The dining room gleamed with polished elegance, and the scent of freshly baked bread and truffle oil drifted from the kitchen. Alexis took a moment to center herself. She knew tonight might reveal more of the truth she had come to find. Just as the first wave of guests settled in, she caught sight of a man entering the restaurant. His presence was unmistakable: Victor Whitmore, one of the restaurant's most notorious regulars. Dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, Victor moved with a self-assurance that seemed to command the room. His salt and pepper hair was swept back in precise waves, and his piercing gaze scanned the restaurant as though he were inspecting his own domain. Victor was infamous among the staff. Alexis had heard about him in passing, a wealthy investor known for his extravagant spending and equally extravagant demands. But what truly set Victor apart was his entitlement, a casual arrogance he wore as easily as his tailored suit. Daniel, the shift manager, immediately took notice, his expression shifting to one of subtle anxiety. He straightened his jacket and gestured for the staff to be on high alert, sending a quick, meaningful glance toward Alexis and Sophie, the senior waitress. It was clear that everyone knew the unspoken rule. Victor was a priority, and he expected nothing less than flawless service. Watch and learn, Sophie muttered to Alexis as they approached Victor's table. This is the kind of customer you'll deal with in a place like this. Whatever he asks for, we deliver. No questions. Alexis forced herself to nod. Hiding her disapproval, she could feel her pulse quicken, bracing herself for what was about to unfold. As they neared the table, Victor barely acknowledged their presence. His attention remained fixed on his phone, one hand resting on the polished mahogany table. Without looking up, he snapped his fingers, signaling his impatience. Water with lemon, and be quick about it, he ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. Sophie, unfazed, nodded professionally. Right away, Mr. Whitmore. Alexis followed her back to the service station, watching as Sophie quickly filled a crystal glass with ice-cold water, expertly adding a lemon wedge to the rim. Alexis took mental notes, noting how practiced and detached Sophie seemed. She clearly knew how to handle this type of customer, tolerant on the surface, yet indifferent underneath. They returned to Victor's table with the water, and Sophie placed it gently before him. Victor took a sip, then glanced at Alexis, his eyes narrowing as though appraising her. "You're new, aren't you?" he asked, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His tone was sharp, his words intended to cut. Alexis forced herself to smile politely. "Yes, sir. Just started training." Victor chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Well, let's hope you don't last long. This isn't exactly the place for someone inexperienced." The insult hung in the air, and Alexis felt a flicker of anger but quickly suppressed it. She was here to observe, to understand. Responding would only betray her cover, and she was determined to see this through. As the night wore on, Victor's behavior grew bolder, and he found fault in everything Alexis did. If she placed a dish an inch too far to the left, he scoffed. When she returned with his requested side of dressing, he accused her of taking too long. Every action, every small detail, seemed to give him ammunition for criticism. "Is it that difficult?" he muttered as she placed a bread basket on the table. "This isn't fast food. Sweetheart, try to remember where you are." Alexis clenched her jaw, feeling the sting of his words, yet she maintained her composure, nodding politely and moving on to her next task. She glanced around, hoping for a sign of solidarity from her coworkers, but they all seemed keen to keep their distance. No one wanted to cross Victor Whitmore. The dinner service continued, and Victor's behavior became increasingly condescending. When Alexis accidentally brushed against his table, he leaned forward, his eyes flashing with disdain. "Be careful, sweetheart," he sneered, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "It's a wonder they let people like you work here." The words struck a nerve, and Alexis felt a surge of memories from her past. The years of being doubted, dismissed, and underestimated. But she reminded herself why she was here, biting her tongue as she focused on her task. She knew that this was what she needed to see. The reality of how her staff handled difficult guests and the impact of that culture on everyone around them. Victor's insults grew increasingly personal as he tested the boundaries, clearly enjoying the power he held. He complained that his steak was undercooked, then later accused Alexis of bringing him the wrong wine, though it was precisely what he had ordered. Each interaction seemed designed to erode her patience, to see how much she could endure. Finally, nearing the end of his meal, Victor looked at her with a smirk and leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of red wine lazily. "Tell me, sweetheart," he drawled, "ever thought about doing something more suitable for someone like you? This doesn't seem to be your strong suit." Alexis's polite smile wavered, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Victor laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "Oh, no, I think you've done quite enough." The final straw came when Victor, seemingly bored with his food, deliberately knocked a glass of water onto the table, spilling it across the pristine tablecloth. He looked up at Alexis with feigned innocence, a glint of malice in his eyes. "Oops," he said with a faint smile. "Be a dear and clean that up, would you?" The room fell silent, the quiet tension thick enough to cut. Alexis could feel the weight of every gaze, each pair of eyes watching to see how she would respond. She knelt to mop up the water, feeling the humiliation sink in as she did. But instead of breaking, she let the moment steal her resolve. She had seen enough to understand the problem now. It wasn't just Victor, but the culture that allowed him to act with such impunity. Finally, Victor tossed a few bills onto the table, not bothering to wait for the check. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket, and gave her one last look, his expression smug. "Next time, try not to embarrass yourself," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Without another word, he strode toward the exit, leaving a wake of tense silence behind him. Alexis rose slowly, her hands shaking as she held the damp cloth. She glanced around the dining room, meeting the eyes of other guests and staff members who looked away, their discomfort evident. No one had intervened. No one had stood up for her, or for the values that she had worked so hard to instill in this establishment. The shift ended in a strained, uncomfortable silence. Alexis changed out of her uniform in the staff room, her mind racing with the events of the evening. She had come to observe, to understand the truth of her restaurant's culture. And tonight she had witnessed it firsthand. Walking out into the cool night, Alexis took a deep breath, her heart heavy but resolute. The problem was worse than she had anticipated. But now she understood the depth of the issue. This was no longer just about customer service. It was about restoring the soul of her business. Tomorrow, she would return with a plan. Alexis returned to the restaurant the following evening with a sense of trepidation. She had barely slept, replaying the events of the previous night over and over. Victor's words, his condescension, and the utter lack of response from her staff gnawed at her. She had known that running a luxury establishment came with certain challenges, but witnessing such behavior firsthand, and the staff's silence in the face of it, had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Tonight, she was ready to face whatever she needed to in order to uncover the full extent of the problem. As she stepped into the dining room, Alexis took her place as a trainee again, moving carefully to avoid drawing attention to herself. Her co-workers barely acknowledged her presence, busy setting tables and polishing silverware. She had expected this, after all. The life of a trainee in a high-end restaurant was unglamorous and easily overlooked. But beneath the calm surface, Alexis felt her patience tightening, like a string wound too taut. Tonight, she would get answers. Shortly after service began, the maitre d' glanced at the entrance and went rigid, his eyes widening with a flash of anxiety. Alexis followed his gaze and felt a faint dread settle in her stomach. Victor Whitmore had returned, dressed in a deep blue suit with a silk pocket square. Victor strode in with the air of a man who expected the world to bend to his will. He exuded entitlement, barely glancing at the other diners as he made his way to his usual table. His expression was one of complete indifference, but his eyes held that same glint of arrogance Alexis had seen the night before. Daniel, the shift manager, quickly intercepted her and Sophie as they set plates on a nearby table. "You," he said, nodding at Alexis, his voice taut. "You're stationed at Victor's table again tonight. Just try not to mess up." Alexis took a steadying breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She nodded without a word and followed Sophie to Victor's table, bracing herself for what she knew would be another difficult night. She had barely set down the menu before Victor glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. "Oh, it's you again," he drawled, his voice thick with disdain. "Surprised you're still here after last night's performance." Alexis forced a polite smile, replying in a soft voice, "I'm here to assist you, sir. Can I get you started with anything?" Victor scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Just get me a scotch. Neat. And don't keep me waiting this time." as she moved toward the bar to fetch his drink. Alexis could feel the eyes of the staff on her. They were watching, whispering, exchanging nervous glances. No one envied her position tonight, but no one stepped forward to help either. She realized, with a sinking heart, that Victor's mistreatment of her was considered normal here, an accepted part of his demanding customer status. She returned to Victor's table with his drink. Placing it carefully on a coaster, he took a sip, barely glancing at her, and turned his attention to his phone. For the next hour, Alexis kept her distance, checking on his table only when he motioned her over with a flick of his hand, each gesture more impatient than the last. At one point, he ordered a specific bottle of wine, stating the exact vintage and vineyard. Alexis searched the cellar, finding the bottle he requested, and brought it to his table with the utmost care, only to be met with a scoff. "Are you even capable of doing anything right?" he sneered, as though the mere act of serving him was an insult to his status. He examined the label, making a show of his disapproval. "This isn't at the correct temperature," he muttered, waving her off. "Take it back and do it properly." She complied, her jaw clenched, maintaining her composure as she returned the bottle to the cellar to adjust its temperature. Every interaction with him was a challenge, designed to undermine her, to test her patience. But she stayed calm, refusing to give him the reaction he was seeking. Toward the end of the night, however, Victor's behavior took a darker turn. After finishing his main course, he leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine with a lazy smile. "Tell me, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for several nearby tables to overhear. "How does someone like you end up here? Can't imagine you'd have many other options." The humiliation was palpable. Alexis felt a flash of anger, memories of her early struggles flooding her mind. But she knew better than to respond. That was exactly what he wanted. Instead, she replied in a steady tone, "I'm here to assist you, sir. If there's anything else I can bring for you, please let me know." Victor smirked, clearly disappointed by her lack of reaction. "Sure," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if you can manage that without messing up." As she turned to leave, Victor reached out and deliberately knocked a fork onto the floor. It clattered loudly against the tile, drawing the attention of several guests. Alexis paused, knowing what was expected. She knelt down to retrieve the fork, feeling the weight of his gaze on her, his satisfaction at watching her bend to his whim. But just as she rose, something else happened. In a move that shocked everyone around them, Victor leaned forward and slapped her cheek. Not hard, but enough to make a statement. The sound echoed in the now silent dining room. For a moment, Alexis stood frozen, her cheek stinging, the humiliation radiating through her body. Every eye in the room was on her, but no one moved. Daniel, the shift manager, stood by the bar, his face pale, torn between his duty to the restaurant and his fear of offending a high-paying customer. Victor, clearly emboldened by the lack of response, smirked and reached for his glass, tossing its contents over her in one swift motion. The cold wine soaked through her clothes, leaving her drenched, standing in stunned silence. "There," he sneered. "Now you look like you belong." The humiliation was complete, a bitter sting that went beyond physical discomfort. Alexis could feel the weight of every gaze, the pity in some eyes, the discomfort in others, and worst of all, the silent acceptance from her own staff. No one had stepped in to help her. No one had even spoken up. Daniel finally approached, his expression apologetic but nervous. He leaned in close, his voice a shaky whisper. Maybe it's best if you leave," he murmured, glancing at Victor nervously. "We don't want things to escalate." Alexis looked at him, seeing the fear and complicity written on his face. She realized then that this problem went far deeper than one difficult customer. Her staff had learned to tolerate this behavior, had accepted it as an unspoken rule of their work. They were more concerned with appeasing a man like Victor than upholding the dignity of their colleagues. Without a word, Alexis turned and headed toward the kitchen. Feeling the sticky residue of wine clinging to her skin, she was humiliated, yes, but something else was rising inside her. A quiet, unshakable resolve. She had seen enough, experienced enough, to understand the depth of the problem. This was no longer about observation, it was about action. In the kitchen, she took a moment to compose herself, wiping her face with a towel, smoothing her apron. The pain, the shame, these emotions fueled her determination. She wasn't finished yet. In fact, she had only just begun. When Alexis finally stepped out of the kitchen, she was no longer the invisible trainee. She was Alexis Reynolds, the owner of this establishment, and she was ready to remind everyone exactly who she was. The night wasn't over for Victor Whitmore or her staff. A reckoning was coming, one that would restore the respect and dignity she had fought so hard to build. As she moved toward the dining room, her head held high, Alexis felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that tonight would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not only for her restaurant but for everyone who worked within it. Alexis emerged from the kitchen, the air thick with the tension left in Victor's wake. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, each guest and staff member casting nervous, uncertain glances in her direction. Her clothes were still damp, her cheeks slightly red where Victor had struck her, but she held her head high, her gaze steady. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment to confront the reality that had taken root in her own establishment. She walked with calm, deliberate steps toward Victor's table, her expression serene yet unyielding. As she neared him, the room seemed to hold its breath, everyone waiting to see what she would do. Victor, reclining casually in his seat, barely looked up. He was used to being untouchable, to getting away with anything he pleased. But Alexis wasn't about to let that happen tonight. She stopped directly in front of his table, reached down, and calmly removed her soiled apron. Folding it neatly, she placed it on the table beside him. Victor glanced up, his smirk faltering as he saw the change in her demeanor. There was no trace of fear or deference in her gaze now, only a steady, unbreakable resolve. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," she began, her voice low and controlled, carrying a quiet strength that silenced the entire room. "My name is Alexis Reynolds. I'm not just a waitress. I own this restaurant and every other location in this chain." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, the room was completely silent, the gravity of her revelation settling over the guests and staff alike. Victor's face paled, his previous arrogance fading into a look of stunned disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, his confidence suddenly crumbling beneath her steady gaze. Alexis held his stare, letting him feel the weight of his actions, the consequences he had never expected to face. "You didn't just humiliate an employee," she continued, her voice unyielding. "You humiliated the owner of this establishment. And I can assure you, Mr. Whitmore, that there will be consequences." Victor's expression twisted, a mixture of embarrassment and anger flashing across his face. He glanced around the room, looking for support, but found none. The other guests had turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. Daniel, the shift manager, stood frozen near the bar, his face pale, his usual confidence gone. The rest of the staff exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the magnitude of their silence. Clearing his throat, Victor forced a laugh, attempting to brush off the situation with a wave of his hand. "Come on now," he muttered, his voice strained. This is just a misunderstanding. There's no need to make a scene." Alexis didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, her tone resolute. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Whitmore, and this isn't a scene, it's an example." She looked out over the gathered guests and staff, her voice carrying clearly through the dining room. "I want to make something very clear. Behavior like Mr. Whitmore's is unacceptable here. Respect is not negotiable. Turning to Daniel, she continued, after we close tonight, we're going to have a serious conversation. Every staff member is expected to be there. Her tone was calm but carried an unspoken command, a quiet strength that left no room for argument. Daniel swallowed hard, nodding quickly, his previous bravado shattered. Victor, now visibly sweating, attempted to regain his composure, his voice rising in forced confidence. "You can't ban me from here," he protested, his tone tinged with desperation. "I'm a paying customer. You need people like me." Alexis met his gaze without wavering, her words sharp and precise. "What I need, Mr. Whitmore, is an environment where every guest and every employee is treated with respect. Effective immediately. You are no longer welcome in any of my establishments. Consider yourself banned from every location." A ripple of shock spread through the room, followed by a murmur of quiet approval. Some of the guests even began to clap, hesitant at first, but their applause quickly grew as they recognized her stand against his bullying. It was as if they, too, had been waiting for someone to confront him, to finally bring accountability to a man who had coasted through life without consequences. Victor's face flushed with rage and humiliation. He pushed his chair back abruptly, glaring at her as he rose to his feet. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his voice venomous. "You'll regret treating me this way." Alexis remained unperturbed, her expression calm. "I doubt that," she replied evenly, watching as he stormed toward the exit. The doors swung shut behind him, and the tension in the room lifted, replaced by a sense of relief, a feeling that something necessary had just happened. As the applause died down, Alexis turned her attention to her staff, who had gathered nervously near the bar. Their faces were a mix of shame, regret, and uncertainty, realizing that their complicity had contributed to the evening's events. Alexis could see the guilt in their eyes, the recognition of how far they had strayed from the values she had set for her business. Taking a deep breath, she addressed them, her voice firm yet understanding. "Tonight, something very wrong happened here, not just because of one man's behavior, but because of how it was allowed to happen. Silence is complicity. When we ignore disrespect, we allow it to thrive. This isn't just a business, it's a community. And if we lose sight of that, we lose everything." Her words resonated in the silence that followed. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement, others looking down, visibly chastened. Daniel finally stepped forward, his face pale, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have done something. I thought keeping him happy was the right thing." Alexis gave him a small nod, her expression softening slightly. "I understand, Daniel, but keeping peace isn't the same as doing what's right. Tonight showed us that we need to be better. All of us. Respect isn't just something we show our guests. It's something we extend to each other. Every day." Looking around the room, she continued, "Starting tomorrow, we're going to make some changes. Each of you will undergo cultural competence and empathy training. We'll focus on respect, inclusion, and how to handle situations like the one we faced tonight. We will not tolerate any behavior that undermines the values we stand for." The staff nodded, their expressions shifting from shame to determination. Alexis could see the beginning of change in their eyes, the willingness to confront their own biases and uphold the standards they had neglected. She knew it wouldn't be an easy journey, but tonight marked the start of something new, a chance to rebuild, to reclaim the heart of her business. As she dismissed the staff to finish the evening's closing tasks, Alexis felt a renewed sense of purpose. This restaurant had been her dream, her pride, her legacy. She had built it on the foundations of respect and dignity, and tonight, she had fought to preserve those values. As she left the dining room, she caught a final glimpse of the staff as they resumed their work, their movements lighter, their expressions more focused. She knew they were starting to understand the significance of what had happened, the importance of holding each other accountable, Tonight had been a turning point, a moment that would redefine the culture of her restaurant, not just for her staff, but for her guests as well. Alexis left with a quiet determination, knowing that she had taken the first step toward restoring the respect and dignity that her restaurant stood for. The following day, Alexis arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The air was crisp, and the early morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the quiet dining room. The place felt different in the morning light, as though the events of the previous night had cleansed it, leaving a sense of renewal. Yet she knew that true change wouldn't come from one night alone. It would require a sustained commitment, a complete overhaul of the culture that had taken root here. Her staff filtered in gradually, each employee quieter than usual, their expressions a mix of nervous anticipation and resolve. Word of last night's events had spread quickly, and as Alexis observed her team, she could see the impact the incident had left on them. Gone were the dismissive glances and easygoing banter. Instead, they moved with a new awareness, a readiness for change. As they gathered in the staff room, Alexis addressed them, her gaze calm yet unyielding. "Last night, we experienced something that no one should ever have to face," she began, her voice carrying a quiet authority that held everyone's attention. "But we also learned an important lesson about our responsibility to each other, to our guests, and to the values that this restaurant was built upon." The staff listened intently, a sense of humility in their faces. Even Daniel, the shift manager, stood silently at the back, his usual confident expression replaced with one of quiet contemplation. Alexis could see that her words were sinking in, that they were ready to take accountability for the culture they had allowed to grow unchecked. "Today marks a new beginning," she continued, her tone softening slightly. "We're going to rebuild this place, not just as a business, but as a community that stands for respect, dignity, and integrity. From this point on, we will uphold these values in every interaction, with every guest and each other. No exceptions." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over them. "In light of this commitment, I'm implementing a mandatory training program. Every one of you, myself included, will undergo cultural competence and empathy training. This program will teach us to recognize and address bias, to respond effectively to difficult situations, and to create an atmosphere of mutual respect." A murmur spread through the room as the staff exchanged glances, some appearing curious, others slightly apprehensive. Training was a rarity in this environment, and for some, it was an unfamiliar concept. Yet Alexis could sense a growing openness among them, a willingness to embrace the change. One of the servers, a young woman named Hannah, raised her hand hesitantly. Will we be able to speak up if something like last night happens again?" she asked, her voice tentative but hopeful. Alexis nodded, her gaze steady. "Absolutely. I'm also implementing an anonymous feedback system. If anyone, guest or staff, engages in disrespectful behavior, you'll have a safe way to report it. And I'll personally review each report to ensure that every concern is addressed." Hannah's expression brightened, and a few other staff members nodded, visibly relieved. Alexis knew this wasn't just about preventing another incident with a guest like Victor. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt empowered to stand up for themselves and each other. After the initial meeting, Alexis wasted no time in launching the training program. She had hired an outside consultant with expertise in workplace culture and empathy training, a seasoned professional named Carla, who arrived that same day. Carla greeted the team warmly, her demeanor both approachable and confident. With her guidance, Alexis and her staff began their first session, which started with an exercise on active listening and empathy. Empathy isn't just about feeling sorry for someone, Carla explained to the group, her tone gentle yet authoritative. It's about putting yourself in another person's shoes and recognizing their humanity, their needs, and their dignity. She then divided them into pairs and asked each person to share a story of a time they felt disrespected or overlooked. Alexis paired up with Daniel, the shift manager. He looked uncomfortable at first, fidgeting with his hands as he thought of what to say. Alexis waited patiently, her posture open, allowing him the space to express himself. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "I grew up in a small town, and I remember working in a diner when I was a teenager," he said, glancing down. "Back then, I used to get customers who would treat me like I was invisible, just because I was the kid bussing their tables. I guess somewhere along the way, I forgot what that felt like." Alexis listened closely, a sense of understanding settling between them. It was clear to her now that Daniel's behavior wasn't born out of malice, but out of complacency, a survival mechanism he'd developed to navigate difficult guests. She offered him a small nod, a gesture of understanding, and shared her own story of feeling dismissed in the early days of her career, of the looks that said she didn't belong. Through the exercise, Alexis noticed a gradual shift among her staff. Each person's story revealed a layer of vulnerability, a glimpse of shared humanity that allowed them to connect on a deeper level. By the end of the session, there was a newfound respect in the room, an understanding that they all had their own battles, their own struggles, and that supporting each other could only make them stronger. Over the next week, the training program continued with role-playing exercises that put them in scenarios similar to the incident with Victor. In one session, Carla instructed staff members to play the roles of difficult guests, testing their peers' patience and respect. Some of the employees found it challenging at first, feeling the weight of how easily a situation could spiral without the right approach. Others began to understand just how damaging it could be to ignore or enable bad behavior. In one role-playing exercise, Daniel found himself in a scenario where he had to intervene when a guest belittled a server. His initial hesitation was clear, but as he gained confidence, he addressed the imaginary guest with firmness and respect, asserting the restaurant's standards without hesitation. The exercise ended with a round of applause, and Alexis felt a swell of pride as she watched him finally embody the values they were working to instill. As the days passed, a noticeable change began to take root in the restaurant. Employees moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their interactions warmer and more genuine. They took the time to engage with each guest, not because of their appearance or status, but out of a sincere commitment to making everyone feel valued. The feedback system proved to be an invaluable tool, allowing them to address small issues before they escalated, and to keep each other accountable. Alexis, too, made an effort to remain visible on the floor, checking in with her staff regularly, listening to their concerns, and reinforcing the idea that her door was always open. She knew that a healthy workplace culture depended not only on rules and policies but on genuine human connection. Guests began to notice the change as well. Some of the regulars commented on the improved atmosphere, praising the staff's attentiveness and warmth. New customers left glowing reviews, noting the restaurant's inclusivity and welcoming vibe. Each positive comment felt like a step closer to restoring the soul of her business, reminding Alexis that the hard work was paying off. One evening, after a successful dinner service, Alexis gathered the staff for a brief meeting. As they stood together in the soft glow of the dining room, she addressed them with a quiet pride in her voice. "This isn't just a restaurant," she said, her gaze sweeping over each of them. "It's a place where people come to feel valued, respected, and seen. And each one of you plays a vital role in making that happen. We've come a long way, and I'm proud of every single one of you for embracing this change." A soft ripple of applause spread through the group, accompanied by genuine smiles and nods of appreciation. They had grown together, weathered a difficult challenge, and emerged stronger for it. For the first time, Alexis felt that her restaurant was truly living up to the values she had envisioned, a place that treated people with dignity, no matter their status. As she locked up for the night, Alexis allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road to this point hadn't been easy, and there would always be more work to do, more challenges to face. But as she looked around the empty dining room, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a certainty that she had done the right thing. The spirit of her restaurant, the respect, the inclusivity, the warmth had been restored, and she knew that, together with her staff, they would continue to build on this foundation, creating a legacy that honored the values they held dear. As the weeks passed, Alexis's training program became a regular fixture in the lives of her staff. Every day before the dinner shift, the employees gathered in the dining room for workshops led by Carla, the cultural competence consultant, and Alexis herself. These sessions became more than just lessons. They were a safe space where the team could express themselves, confront their biases, and build a culture of empathy and respect that would redefine the heart of the restaurant. The first few days had been challenging. Some staff members were skeptical, unused to the vulnerability that came with sharing their own experiences and learning about those of their peers. But as Carla guided them through exercises, their walls began to fall. They were beginning to see that this wasn't just about pleasing management. It was about transforming their workplace into a community that valued every individual. In one session, Carla initiated an exercise she called perspectives. She asked each staff member to anonymously write down an experience where they had felt disrespected, overlooked, or judged. The papers were then collected and redistributed so that each person read someone else's story aloud. Alexis watched as each experience was shared, the room growing quieter as they listened to the vulnerability of their colleagues. Daniel, the shift manager, cleared his throat as he read a story about a young woman who had felt invisible in a previous job, ignored by her team simply because she was new. He glanced up, his eyes meeting those of his coworkers, and Alexis could see the realization dawn in him. He was beginning to understand how his treatment of trainees, like Alexis when she was undercover, might have made others feel the same way. When it was Alexis's turn, she read a story about a waiter who, as a teenager, had faced prejudice from customers who made assumptions based on his background. As she finished reading, she looked up, her gaze meeting that of a young server named Luis, who nodded quietly, clearly identifying with the story. Alexis felt a pang of regret, realizing that even in her own establishment, her staff may have endured these struggles in silence. This exercise opened a door, creating a shared empathy that helped break down the divisions between them. The sessions also included role-playing scenarios to help the team learn how to respond to difficult situations with professionalism and compassion. One day, Carla set up a mock situation where one server had to play the role of an unruly guest, while another played the staff member handling the situation. The goal was to defuse conflict while maintaining dignity for both the guest and the server. Sophie, one of the senior waitresses, volunteered first, playing the staff member. Her partner,
Luis,
played the role of the demanding guest, making exaggerated complaints about his meal. As Luis leaned back, his voice dripping with sarcasm, Sophie responded calmly, setting boundaries while politely reiterating the restaurant's commitment to quality. Her voice was steady, her demeanor kind yet assertive. After the exercise, Carla pointed out the importance of empathy, noting how Sophie's ability to listen to the guest and calmly address his complaints was a valuable skill that could help prevent conflicts before they escalated. Alexis felt a surge of pride as she watched her team embrace these new techniques, understanding that they were learning not just to deal with difficult guests, but to uphold the values she had established. In another training session, Carla introduced the concept of inclusion and asked the staff to think about how their behaviors and attitudes might affect guests who didn't fit the typical profile of their usual clientele. They discussed how they could create an atmosphere that welcomed people from all backgrounds, regardless of their status, appearance, or behavior. One particular role-playing exercise put Daniel back in the spotlight. Carla asked him to imagine a scenario where a guest treated a fellow employee disrespectfully, similar to how Victor Whitmore had treated Alexis. In the scenario, Daniel was expected to step in, asserting the restaurant's commitment to respect without being confrontational. At first, Daniel was hesitant, but as he repeated the exercise, He grew more confident. By the third round, his voice held a new firmness. His posture relaxed yet authoritative. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, projecting a calm authority that filled the room. "We pride ourselves on treating all our guests with respect, and we ask that our staff be treated the same way." His response was met with a round of applause, and Alexis couldn't help but smile. She saw a true shift in him. He was no longer just a manager maintaining order but a leader standing up for the values they were building. With each passing day, Alexis could see subtle changes taking root. Her staff's interactions became warmer, more genuine. They took the time to greet guests personally, not just out of habit, but because they understood that each interaction had the potential to shape someone's experience. Guests who once might have been overlooked now received the same level of attentiveness as the high-profile clients, and Alexis began to notice the difference in their satisfaction. Positive reviews poured in, describing the welcoming atmosphere, the attention to detail, and the kindness of the staff. This feedback validated her efforts, reassuring her that they were on the right path. The anonymous feedback system also proved invaluable. Staff members began using it to report minor issues, which Alexis could address promptly. Complaints from guests about disrespectful behavior or overlooked service diminished noticeably as her team held each other accountable. In the past, they had seen these issues as just part of the job, something they couldn't change. Now, they were empowered to take action, knowing that Alexis had their backs. During one of the feedback reviews, Alexis noticed a comment from a guest who had observed a server stepping in to help a struggling trainee. The guest wrote about how impressed they were by the teamwork and how it had elevated their entire experience. Alexis knew then that the transformation was not just happening on the surface. It was becoming part of the restaurant's DNA, a core value that would endure. The atmosphere within the restaurant transformed, creating a ripple effect that touched every aspect of the business. Even on the busiest nights, the staff moved with a sense of purpose, supporting each other seamlessly. They shared a camaraderie that hadn't existed before, a mutual understanding that transcended their roles. The team was no longer just a group of employees but a collective that took pride in upholding a culture of respect and empathy. As the program concluded, Carla gathered the staff for a final session, during which they reflected on their journey. Each person shared one thing they had learned, and one commitment they were making to uphold the new standards they had set together. When it was Daniel's turn, he stood a little taller, his voice steady. "I've learned that leadership isn't just about keeping things running smoothly," he said, glancing around the room. "It's about protecting the values we stand for, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm committed to making sure that everyone here feels respected, our guests, and our team." One by one, each member of the team made their own commitments to treat others with kindness, to listen, to speak up against disrespect. Alexis listened, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over her. This was more than she had hoped for. Her team had embraced a sense of ownership, transforming the restaurant into a place that truly embodied the values she cherished. Afterward, Alexis took a moment to address her staff, her voice filled with gratitude and pride. "This restaurant is more than a business," she said, her gaze sweeping over each face. "It's a reflection of all of us, of the respect, empathy, and dignity we bring into this space every day. I'm incredibly proud of each of you for embracing this change, and for showing that we're committed to making this a place where everyone feels valued." As they applauded, Alexis felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced the challenge of her career, and together, they had overcome it. The restaurant now stood as a symbol of resilience, a place where kindness and respect were woven into every detail. That evening, as Alexis walked through the dining room, she noticed a group of guests, an elderly couple and their granddaughter, enjoying a quiet meal in the corner. A server approached them, offering a warm smile and engaging them in friendly conversation. The elderly man leaned back, content, clearly feeling at ease in a place that embraced him without question. Alexis felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what she had envisioned all along, a place where people felt seen, respected, and welcome, no matter who they were. The restaurant had come full circle, his heart restored, the spirit renewed. As she looked around the dining room, Alexis knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew she had built something lasting, something worth fighting for. Together with her team, they had created a legacy that would continue to thrive, a place of warmth, dignity, and respect, a true reflection of the values that had brought them all together. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation Alexis had envisioned came to life, altering the restaurant in ways she had only hoped for at the outset. The changes in the staff's attitudes and behaviors were evident not just in their interactions with guests, but in their rapport with each other. The atmosphere had evolved from one of polished efficiency to one of genuine warmth and camaraderie, creating a ripple effect that extended beyond the dining room and into the lives of everyone involved. One evening, Alexis stood near the entrance, observing the restaurant as it bustled with activity. She felt a quiet pride as she watched her team embody the values she had worked so hard to instill. Sophie, the senior waitress who had once shown hints of detachment, now moved with a newfound empathy, her face lighting up as she greeted each guest. She took time to make everyone feel welcome, from the regulars to the occasional diner who had stumbled upon the restaurant for the first time. Near the bar, Daniel, the shift manager, was in conversation with a couple celebrating their anniversary. His smile was relaxed, his posture open, and Alexis could tell he was genuinely enjoying the interaction. The distance and guarded professionalism that had once defined his demeanor were gone, replaced by an easy confidence and a commitment to creating memorable experiences for every guest. As Alexis walked through the dining room, she caught sight of the family of 4 seated by the window, a mother, father, and 2 young children. They were dressed modestly, clearly not part of the usual high-profile clientele. She remembered how, months earlier, a family like this might have been seated out of the way, their needs attended to only when it was convenient for the staff. But tonight, they were in the heart of the dining room, their table surrounded by laughter and attentive service. Luis, one of the younger servers, approached their table with a warm smile, kneeling slightly to address the children. "Do you guys like pizza?" he asked with a playful grin, holding up a menu that had a special kids section. The children's eyes sparkled with excitement, and their parents exchanged appreciative smiles. Luis continued to engage them throughout the meal, ensuring they felt as important as any other guest in the restaurant. The shift in Luis's demeanor was particularly meaningful to Alexis. She recalled a time when he had felt uneasy and overlooked, reluctant to speak up or show his true personality. But now, he moved through the restaurant with confidence, empowered by the changes and the support of his team. Watching him engage with the guests, Alexis felt a surge of gratitude, knowing that the environment they had built together had given him and others like him the freedom to be themselves. The anonymous feedback system had become a valuable tool for sustaining the restaurant's cultural shift. Every week, Alexis would review the feedback alongside Daniel, Carla, and several other team members, making it a collaborative effort. The notes varied from small suggestions about menu items to moments where staff members had gone above and beyond, reinforcing the positive behaviors they wanted to encourage. One note stood out to her one day, submitted by an elderly guest who had dined alone on a busy Saturday night. The guest wrote about how Luis had approached him with genuine kindness, engaging him in a warm conversation that turned a simple meal into a memorable experience. The note ended with a heartfelt thank you, saying that the warmth and attention made him feel like he belonged. This kind of feedback had become a common theme, each note a reminder of the profound impact the restaurant's culture was having on its patrons. Alexis knew that the transformation was more than surface level. It was a shift in the spirit of the restaurant, and the guests could feel it. Her efforts to engage with her employees didn't end with the feedback system. Each week, Alexis made a point to sit down with a different staff member, whether it was a server, a bartender, or a chef, to check in and hear about their experiences. She wanted to make sure her team felt valued and seen. Knowing that their work went beyond just taking orders and delivering food, it was about creating a community. One day, during a conversation with Sophie, Alexis asked her how she felt about the recent changes. Sophie took a moment, looking thoughtful. Honestly, she began, I didn't think it would make this much of a difference, but I feel more connected to what we're doing now. It's not just about the guests or the tips. It's about the kind of place we're building together. The conversation left Alexis deeply moved. She had always believed in the power of creating an inclusive environment. But hearing how the changes had personally affected her team members confirmed that they were making a lasting impact. Each person's growth contributed to the bigger picture, and together, they had created something far more meaningful than she had anticipated. The clientele had also evolved. With the shift in atmosphere, word had spread, attracting a broader, more diverse array of guests, families, groups of friends, couples on dates, and even solo diners felt welcome, each person receiving the same attentive service. Regulars still visited, but there was a noticeable change in the type of regulars they attracted, those who valued the warm, inclusive atmosphere the restaurant now embodied. The restaurant's improved reputation began to catch the attention of the local community, leading to features in lifestyle magazines and positive reviews that highlighted the unique environment Alexis and her team had created. One publication noted, more than just a high-end dining experience. The restaurant is a place where every guest feels genuinely welcome. It's a dining experience that restores your faith in hospitality. As the restaurant's popularity grew, Alexis noticed that even the guests who once treated the staff with indifference or entitlement were affected by the change in the atmosphere. Some of the more demanding regulars seemed to soften, recognizing the sincerity of the service they were receiving. The culture of respect was becoming contagious, extending even to those who might have been less inclined to show it in the past. One evening, as the staff prepared to close, Daniel approached Alexis with a question. Do you mind if we have a quick team meeting before we head out? I think the staff could use a reminder of how far we've come. Alexis agreed, and they gathered around, a sense of unity and pride filling the space. Daniel began by thanking everyone for their dedication, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. We're doing something special here, he said. I've seen each of you grow, and I couldn't be prouder to be part of this team. We've built something together that's more than just a restaurant. It's a place where people come to feel respected, cared for, and valued. That's thanks to all of you. The staff responded with applause, and Alexis joined in, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. The restaurant had become more than she had ever imagined. It was a testament to the power of kindness, empathy, and respect, a place where people felt a sense of belonging, regardless of who they were or where they came from. As she looked around the room at her team, Alexis felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had achieved something extraordinary together. And it wasn't just about the success of the business. It was about creating a space that celebrated humanity, a place where everyone, staff and guests alike, was treated with dignity. Later that night, as she locked up and took a final glance at the empty dining room, Alexis knew that they had created a legacy. This restaurant, once just a dream, had become a symbol of resilience, growth, and compassion. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had built something that would endure, a place that stood for the values she had held dear all along. In the quiet glow of the evening, Alexis walked away from the restaurant, her heart full. She knew there would always be challenges, but they had built something unbreakable, something that would continue to inspire everyone who walked through its doors. They had built a community, a place that would always reflect the kindness, strength, and dignity of those who made it possible. Several months had passed since Alexis's undercover stint in her own restaurant, and the establishment had flourished beyond even her greatest hopes. The restaurant's reputation as a place of both luxury and warmth had spread far and wide, becoming a go-to spot not only for fine dining but also for a genuinely inclusive, welcoming experience. Alexis had witnessed her dream grow into a living, breathing testament to the values she held dear: respect, empathy, and community. This legacy was not only hers but was shared among the dedicated individuals who had committed to building it alongside her. To celebrate their journey, Alexis organized a special event for the team. She rented out a private hall at one of the restaurant's partner hotels and transformed it into a beautiful gathering space filled with flowers, soft lighting, and photos of memorable moments they'd shared over the past year. She wanted this night to reflect the love and hard work everyone had poured into making the restaurant what it was today. Invitations went out not only to her current team but also to past employees who had been a part of their journey. It was a night to honor everyone's contributions, to thank them for their trust and resilience. As the staff arrived that evening, they were greeted by a warm ambience and personal touches that Alexis had arranged: framed notes of gratitude, snapshots of small but meaningful moments between coworkers, and words from customer reviews that had recognized the kindness and compassion her team displayed daily. Each table held a small bouquet of fresh flowers, along with personalized thank you cards for every team member. The night was both a celebration and a tribute to the community they had built. Alexis, dressed elegantly in a deep navy gown, greeted each of her team members with a heartfelt hug and words of gratitude. She could feel the sense of pride radiating from everyone around her, a testament to the culture of respect and care they had nurtured. There was Daniel, now confident and compassionate in his role as shift manager. Sophie, with her warm smile and newfound passion for her work. Luis, who had grown into a natural leader among his peers. And Carla, the consultant who had become a treasured friend. Each person had been integral to the transformation, and Alexis felt overwhelmed with gratitude for their dedication. As dinner was served and the room filled with laughter and conversation, Alexis watched her team with a deep sense of fulfillment. Each face told a story, a journey of growth and resilience. The joy that filled the room was palpable, the culmination of months of hard work, of small moments that had gradually reshaped the culture of the restaurant. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, she rose from her seat, her eyes bright with pride, and gently tapped her glass to call for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice filled with warmth. "This evening is a celebration, but more than that, it's a way to honor the journey we've all taken together. When I started this restaurant, I wanted to create a place that wasn't just about food or ambience. I wanted to create a place where people felt seen, respected, and valued. But as we grew, I realized that sometimes the hardest thing is not creating a dream but protecting it. And that's what each of you has done." Her words were met with attentive silence, and she could see the impact they had on each of her team members. She continued, "You have shown me that this isn't just a business, it's a community. Together, we've built something that goes beyond service. We've created a space that reflects who we are and what we believe in, a place that invites everyone to belong, no matter where they come from or who they are. And that's the legacy I'm most proud of." She paused, glancing around the room at the faces of the people who had become more than just employees. They were family. Each of you has brought something unique to this place. Your kindness, your courage, your commitment to doing what's right even when it's difficult. I could not have done this without you, and I am so proud of what we've accomplished together. Tonight, I want you all to know that this success, this legacy, belongs to each and every one of you. The room erupted in applause, some staff members wiping away tears as they exchanged smiles and nods of appreciation. Alexis waited a moment, letting the applause settle before she continued. "In the spirit of what we've built, I want us to keep moving forward, to continue making this a place of respect and warmth. We've proven that it's possible to uphold our values and create something beautiful. And I am committed to supporting each of you as we keep growing." She lifted her glass, her voice steady and heartfelt. "To all of you, to the work we've done, and to the incredible future we're creating together. Cheers." "Cheers," the room echoed, and the staff raised their glasses, their voices filled with excitement and pride. For a moment, Alexis simply basked in the energy. grateful for the journey that had brought them all here. She had built her restaurant as a businesswoman, but tonight, she stood among them as one of their own, a part of the family they had created. Later, as the night wore on, Daniel approached Alexis, a quiet look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Alexis," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "for showing us what leadership really is. I think, for the first time, I truly understand what it means to care about something bigger than just a job." Alexis smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, Daniel. None of this would have been possible without you and everyone else here embracing the change. I'm so proud of the leader you've become." They shared a warm smile, and as Daniel walked back to join the others, Alexis felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had watched him grow from a cautious, compliance-driven manager into a true leader who could inspire others, and she knew that this legacy would continue to flourish in his capable hands. As the event came to a close, the staff took home their personalized thank you cards, mementos of a journey that was far from over. They hugged one another goodbye, exchanging words of appreciation and promises to continue building on the foundation they had set together. Alexis stayed until the last person had left, the hall now quiet, save for the faint echoes of laughter and celebration still lingering in the air. With a satisfied sigh, Alexis made her way back to the restaurant. Now bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights, she unlocked the doors, stepping inside and taking a slow walk through the dining room. It was empty now, the tables set for the next day's service. Each polished glass and folded napkin a testament to the care and respect her team had poured into every detail. She paused by the window, looking out at the city that had become a part of her story, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey to this moment had been long and often challenging, but it had taught her the importance of resilience, of standing by her principles, and of the power of creating something that truly mattered. The restaurant was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had helped shape it, each person who had contributed their kindness, their talent, and their heart. In the quiet of the evening, Alexis knew that her work was far from done. There would be new challenges, new moments that tested their commitment to these values. But with a team that had proven their dedication time and time again, she was confident that they could face anything together. As she turned off the lights and locked up for the night, Alexis felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her restaurant had become everything she had dreamed of and more. A place of respect, empathy, and warmth. A legacy that would live on through the people who had helped build it. It was a reflection of the best parts of herself and her team, and she knew that it would continue to inspire others for years to come. With one last look, she stepped outside, the restaurant standing proudly behind her, a beacon of what could be achieved through resilience, kindness, and a commitment to doing what was right. She walked away with a full heart, knowing that the legacy of Alexis Reynolds was one that would endure, echoing through the lives of those who had been touched by her vision.